Chaile Time. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Chaile Time. Toby, welcome.
Thank you, Meneer Kanama. How are you?
I'm good, and you, sir?
All right.
I'm good. So, what is that you've been busy with in your life? What's happening? Well, you are busy, but I don't see you. We hardly meet.
Just we're busy.
We're just passing each other on corridors.
Yeah, we don't really talk anymore. You know. Yeah, sure. When you're on the airplane, we're already booking your next flight. But you don't really work at the moment. I mean, I remember that yesterday or the day before you went to Durban Bargaining Council to deal with a 20-minute conciliation, and then you went to eat out nicely, back to the airport, whole day just for a 20-minute conciliation, and then you call it work.
You know, I once drove to Vryburg.
Mm-hmm.
It's like 4.5 hours drive or 5 hours drive for a 5-minute sitting. So I guess it's the nature of my work. Sometimes it can take 1 year. Sometimes it can only take 20 minutes. So depending on which part of the country, it's the matter.
Last week I was in the Northern Cape in Pt2.
Yes.
There at the mine I gave training on employment equity. But now, yes, these days, yes, we're dealing with compliance orders. Yes, there's a lot there.
Yeah, so nice.
I've heard that the Department of Labour employed a lot of new agents, inspectors. So they're just visiting businesses, shopping centers, clapping people with compliance orders, you know.
I can attest because I'm doing a lot of checks also at some of the clients of our brother company to check if people are properly documented. I'm doing a lot of that lately. I can even my calendar for this coming week and the next week. There's a lot of that will be a lot of me visiting those facilities to check if people are well documented.
Yeah, so compliance orders is one thing. Also now it's employment equity season. There's amendments coming through, and I can see in the market inspectors are starting to inspect to see if companies have their employment equity plans, and now with the new sectoral targets and the downloadable compliance certificates, so there's a lot of movement.
Yeah.
But
before you continue, I saw a nice video of yours. You were somewhere in the Vaal.
Oh yeah, I was lecturing at the Sidibeng TVET College. This is like 2 weeks ago. Yeah. 300 HR students. I felt like Julius Malema. I had my finger in the air and I was preaching the gospel of HR, of human resources.
Yeah, that was nice. That was beautiful.
Yeah, that was very nice. I really enjoyed that. I told her, you know, where's my? I don't have my ball. My cricket ball. You know, I normally, you know, when I do workshops or so, I teach people about the dark side of labor law. And at the beginning of my lecture, I told the staff my aim is that once I'm done, nobody wants to do HR anymore. So afterwards, I asked anybody still up for HR? I thought, man, it was like a rugby stadium. They all stood up and cheered. Yeah, we want to be in HR. I'm like, okay.
That was a beautiful one.
Yeah, but anyway, so there's 1 or 2 CCMA cases I want to highlight, which we're involved with at the moment. The one that's quite telling is the one that you were involved with in East London. Yes. So we got the arbitration award yesterday where the employer now need to pay 6 months compensation and take the person back. Okay?
Yes.
But you know what's interesting of that case, Chaile? There's 2 things there.
Okay.
The one is, look, the employee filed an unfair labor practice dispute. Okay? Unfair suspension dispute. Yes. So he filed a dispute, sat down, and then we had a conversation. You had a conversation with him over the telephone, and he agreed to a settlement of, in full and final, settlement for 15,000 rand. And then before we can do the documentation, the employer paid him. But we told the employer, wait until we do the documentation. And the employer said, no, we just want to finalize the matter. Vragtig employee opportunistic. You proceeded with the case anyway.
Yes.
It was found to be unfair suspension. as far as the employer not paying him during the suspension period.
100%.
Now the employer mustn't pay him additional 6 months' salary, where that 15,000 rand was actually to settle the entire dispute. But the employer did not wait. We want to get through this dispute as quickly as possible. And we told him, don't pay, wait until he signed the paper. No. The employer just do what they want, eh?
Yeah.
But the second part of that dispute, which is quite interesting, is when we do, he was then put on a hearing where we recommended the dismissal. So we sent the recommendation through as a hearing report to the manager. But now, this manager sent him the hearing report where we say a recommendation, summary dismissal. Then the manager passed away. Dead. Okay?
Yes.
But now, and this is where the 6 months is coming in. Now the poor soul's been waiting for 6 months and he filed the unfair labor practice dispute because in his mind, the employer did not say we are actually implementing the recommendation of the chairperson.
Yes.
They just sent him the recommendation. So in his mind, he wasn't dismissed. And I suppose he's right. I think that's a bit of a lesson to people, when the chairperson makes a recommendation, that's only a recommendation. You as the employer must decide, are you going to uphold the recommendation of the chairperson? But if so, then you actually need to send a dismissal notice through to say, based on the recommendation of the chairperson, we now formally dismiss you. You need to dismiss a person.
And mustn't take a shortcut or something to say no, because the chairperson says so, then it is like that.
Yeah.
But I'm going to highlight on something. In the history of me being in this industry, some of the employers, they don't sit and read emails like we do every day, catch up and then respond and have a certain documentation. Even though some of them, we give them files, HR files with all the document, letter of suspension, letter of this, dismissal notice. Most, I've noticed that they want to do things on their phone.
That's true.
You book something and it's done on the phone. But the traditional way, which we educate them on how to do things and how to write the warning and everything, they don't really use those tools.
They don't. We had a client which I fired 3 months ago for the very same thing. He called me into a meeting and he's upset about 3 or 4 people who were never fired, and they were in a hearing where you chaired the hearing, but they were never fired. And he's upset. We are slipping. So I phoned you and to check. You did send the email with the hearing reports and you recommended the dismissal for all of them. But you sent it to the owner of the business.
Him, yes.
He never read his email. So it's quite embarrassing for him, yeah. You sent like months ago already the hearing reports and he's like, oh, no, I didn't read his email. So then I told him, look, I'm firing you now as client because I'm not going to stand for this shit. You're not going to sit here and accuse me of things. Nah? Because then he already mentioned, he's unhappy about it and he's finding another service provider. So I said, no, I just helped him find another service provider. I
will say it's quite important that all the boxes are ticked because now we are sitting on a settlement for 32,000. For the for that
one.
Yes.
Yeah, it's 34,000.
34,000 that must be paid to that employee.
And it must be taken back.
And it must be taken back. So yeah, it is a lesson. Anyway, we continue with our previous conversation. What were you on about? Just to remind our viewers, and then where were we sitting in terms of our previous educational conversation?
Yeah.
Or very insightful. Because I think also on your TikTok page, I saw questions coming in there on this snippet.
Look, the legislator, they've amended the Code of Good Practice in terms of dismissals, which was effective from the 1st of September 2025. So last time we did part 1, so we are going through the new Code of Good Practice, and people are obviously asking questions, you know. In other words, people are asking questions like, are we now no longer required to follow the process in terms of when you dismiss somebody for misconduct or incapacity or retrenchment? Because, there's sort of idea that the code has been simplified, What does it now mean? It also addresses small businesses, saying small business no longer have to necessarily follow these procedures. So in part 1, we dealt with small business, and then we went up to Schedule 8, subsection 11, which is the old Schedule 8, subsection 4, that deals with dismissal for misconduct. So people can just watch part 1 to get a good introduction to the code. Today we're going to continue. We're going to deal with industrial action. They've got a nice new piece in there, provision in there dealing with dismissals and industrial action. That's when people go on a strike, especially an illegal or unprotected strike. We're going to quickly deal with probation, and there's also incapacity and also retrenchments. Okay, so but just quickly, just to highlight an important fact here, Tsepo, is that the code for me is very, the nuts and the bolts, the detail, the essence of the code is still the same as it always been. There's still procedures.
Yes.
Whether you are dismissing somebody for operational requirements or misconduct or incapacity or whatever the case may be, the procedures are still there. The procedures are mostly the same. Where they've simplified it is the language. Like I made a joke last time, where we as consultants, they don't know what we know. Now they do. What I meant with that is that you had the old code,
yes,
but then for the last 30 odd years, it evolved, the meaning of the code evolved through the courts. Now, the evolution or the development of law through the courts is a very dynamic process. It changed. Law can be amended, not the actual legislation, it's the statute itself, but the interpretation and application of it can be amended on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
What it means. So you'll find that the commissioner at the CC may say, no, the law means this. The judge of the Labour Court will say, no, man, that commissioner is smoking something. It actually means this. Then the Labour Appeal Court will come in and say, no, man, the Labour Court is also smoking something, maybe marijuana or something, it actually means this. And on some rare occasion, the case can go to the Constitutional Court, and then they will give us finality on what that piece of statute actually means. So now you will have language. Now the language has been simplified, and the code now sort of encompasses the core developments of the old codes through the courts. As an example, dismissal for misconduct. You used to have a fair procedure that explains to you the procedure you must follow when you dismiss somebody, which is typically called a disciplinary hearing. But the old codes have never actually used the word disciplinary hearing, they used the word investigation. Now, in the meantime, for the courts, you had the landmark case Avril Elizabeth Home for the mentally handicapped. That basically stated that a hearing does not have to be an over formal. There's not an overly formal approach that you have to adopt for a hearing. It's a simple process, really. Okay, there must be an opportunity for parties to make representations, an opportunity for employer to reflect before a decision is taken to dismiss. But those wording wasn't in the old code. But now we knew, because of the case law, that a hearing is not a criminal trial. You don't have to have all these fancy elements to a hearing. Nothing wrong with it, but you don't have to have it. Yeah. Now the codes basically say a hearing doesn't have to be a overly formal process. There must be representations made and opportunity for reflection by the employer before a decision is taken to dismiss. So they took that literally from that case law. So they're simplifying it now. The one real element that is changing is the introduction of small business, but they're not defining it really in terms of numbers. But look, if you want to know what the issue is with small business, just watch part 1. And now we're continuing. So you'll find that the legislators expressing themselves better. You're simplifying the language around the code, but the core elements are still the same. Just two things again on misconduct dismissals I want to reiterate. The one is the issue of where in the old codes it doesn't use the word disciplinary hearing, now it actually uses the word disciplinary hearing. Okay. And secondly, which is quite interesting, Tsepo, the old code stated that an employee's got a right to interpreter. Now the new code says if it's reasonable to do so.
So it means I can speak in a language. If I know how to speak Afrikaans and everyone is comfortable with Afrikaans in the room, then the meeting can be conducted in Afrikaans.
Look, a month or 2 ago, that's now the case. You went down for the 20-minute conciliation 2 days ago. the brothers, the 10 people you dismissed.
Yes.
I mean, how long did that hearing took just because they couldn't settle on an interpreter? I think they fired 3 interpreters, these employees. Okay. So now if it's becoming an issue, you know, I will simply say, listen, show me your contracts. What language did you sign and agree to? That's a language, it's mostly English, so we'll speak English. That doesn't mean I will not apply my mind to them having an interpreter, obviously, but when it becomes a tedious issue, when they're using this delaying tactic, or if they are just plainly trying to be difficult, there's this avenue now, this recourse for the chairperson to say, listen, we're not going to drag on for another 3 weeks just because you can't agree on this. You're going to be
called bias.
Yeah, I don't write the law. So anyway, so let's just continue quickly. So do we start with Schedule 8, subsection 12, which deals with dismissals and industrial action. Now, once again, it wasn't addressed in the old codes, okay? But for us, this is nothing new. Now the codes expresses how to deal with illegal strikes. But we always knew this is how you deal with illegal strikes. In terms of the development of this piece of this issue through the courts, it's nothing new really. It's just it wasn't drafted into the codes, but now it is. Okay, so let's start. So participation in a strike that does not comply with the provisions of Chapter 4 is misconduct. So they're saying, hey, if you got an illegal strike, it's actually misconduct, okay? However, like any other act of misconduct, it does not always deserve dismissal. So what they are saying is, and we always knew that, if people are going on an illegal strike, some employers will think it's now an automatic dismissal. You're not going to dismiss them. No, it's not to say that it is, okay? The substantive fairness of dismissal in these circumstances must be determined in the light of the facts of the case. And then including the following 3 factors: the seriousness of the contravention of the act, attempts made to comply with the act, and whether the strike was in response to unlawful, unfair, or unreasonable conduct by the employer. So, in the LRA, it provides for a process how to apply for a legal and protected strike. So, to what degree did you not apply with it? You know, that process in terms of the Act is one consideration. But this number C, subsection C here is quite important. You know, whether the employees participate in a legal strike as a response to illegal conduct by the employer themselves. And honestly, Tsepo, I've seen that before, where the employer will deliberately pay staff late, maybe a few hours, so that they can provoke an illegal strike, just so that they can dismiss all of them.
Deliberately so? Deliberately
so, because staff joined the union and they were not happy about it. They did that deliberately because now the LRA states that if a company dismisses staff for participating in an illegal strike, the CCMA don't have jurisdiction to arbitrate. You must go to labor court. So, you know, for a lot of employers, business is like a chess game. You see what you can get away with, what you don't. It's like a strategy, you know. So I'm aware of this. It happened quite some time. It's like 2 years ago already. I'm aware of it. And they managed to dismiss all the staff. It was a truck company. They changed the branding of the truck, re-employed new staff. But that illegal strike was in response to unlawful conduct by the employer. So this is what they're saying. So the employers, you can't just dismiss people. You must check out your own conduct and your own behavior first. Okay. Factors relevant to assessing the seriousness of the contravention includes the following. There's like 4 factors. Number 1, the conduct of the parties to the dispute related to the strike, and the conduct by any other person that has a bearing on the seriousness of the contravention. So obviously, you know, sometimes these strikes can turn to be quite violent, vandalism, assaulting people, so on. Number 2, the legitimacy of the striker's demands. Sometimes we were involved with a case a month ago. It wasn't a CCMA case, it was just an illegal strike. They operated in the territory of a bargaining council, and there's a certain provision in the main agreement that's regulated by the main agreement. The employers were 100% complying with that provision in the main agreement. The staff didn't like it, so they went on an illegal strike. Okay. So their demands was not legitimate in terms of the demands they made, if you connect it to what the main agreement stated. Number C, the duration and timing of the strike. So how long then the illegal strike is obviously also an issue. If it's only for an hour or two, if it's a day or two, then it's obviously an issue. And then the harm caused by the strike. Sometimes it's prejudicial to the employer, sometimes it is not. So then the process before dismissal should include the following. The employer should at the earliest opportunity contact a trade union official to inform the trade union about the strike so as to afford the trade union an opportunity to consult with striking employees. That's obviously if there is a union involved. Number 2, the employer should consider representations by the official and discuss the course of action it intends to adopt with the trade union. If there is no trade union involved, the employer should seek to engage with leaders or representatives of the striking employees.
So they can nominate few people and say, you can go and represent us there.
I want to go back to the previous point here. The employer should consider representations by the official and discuss the course of action it intends to adopt with the trade union. So it's not an arbitrary act from the employer. You need to discuss with the union. Now, just listen, this is what we are intending to do. So you need to consult. Okay, then the employer should issue an ultimatum in clear and unambiguous terms that should state what is required of the employees and what sanction will impose if they do not comply with the ultimatum. The employee should be allowed sufficient time to reflect on the ultimatum and respond to it, either by complying with it or rejecting it. Okay. If an employer issues an ultimatum to employees engaged in an unprotected strike, it may not be fair to dismiss employees for participation in that strike who obey the ultimatum and return to work within the stipulated period. So probably just give them a final warning on the first instance if they do honor the ultimatum. If participating employees reject an ultimatum, the employer may dismiss the employees after considering the conduct and any representations of the employees in accordance with the provision of this code. In cases of collective misconduct, the employer may, depending on the circumstances, satisfy the requirements of procedural fairness by calling for collective representations. Now that's a nice one. The question always is, if you have like 100 staff, a large quantity of staff on an illegal strike, how do you do the hearings? Is it one by one? Is it over WhatsApp? Is it in groups? Now they're saying if it's collective misconduct, large quantities, okay, you can ask for collective representations. Okay, so I can ask the union, listen, all your members, you give me representation.
But 2-3 years ago, how did you do it?
In that specific case you're referring to now,
yes.
We actually charge every single one.
And give them an opportunity to come.
They had an opportunity that there was 3 opportunities for them. They could either make written representations and just email it or WhatsApp it or whatever. We gave them numbers and email addresses. Secondly, we also convened an online disciplinary hearing, at a certain point where they can log in. And thirdly, we also had a chairperson available physically if people wanted to physically come in for the disciplinary hearing. But in that case, nobody actually
nobody
pitched whatsoever. They didn't really care, So it's interesting. You can make collective representation, so that's a nice one.
Yeah, so you see now, that's how I wanted to show our viewers in terms of comparison. So in the olden days, that's how it was done, and now.
So now it seems to suggest I can literally ask everybody to make me representations anyway, So I don't necessarily need to have one-on-one hearings. If the employer cannot reasonably be expected to extend any of these steps to the employees in question, the employer may dispense with them. So depending on the circumstances, if it is not reasonable for the employer to follow these processes, you don't have to follow it. I suppose you'll skip straight to the hearing part where you allow them to make representations. Interesting also, there's a new one here, subsection 13, disciplinary records. Employer should keep records for each employee specifying the nature of any disciplinary transgressions, the actions taken by the employer, and the reason for these actions. So basically, look, I suppose it's obvious you need to keep a record of employees' warnings on file somewhere. It's interesting that's actually in the code now. I think often employees or employers say they've given employees a warning, but there's no record of it.
So it must be there now.
Now it's actually a requirement. You need to keep record of the warnings. Okay, so that is industrial action, then probation. So Tsepo, probation. Earlier on you asked me a question, why do employers do this or that with probation?
Yeah, you will get a question saying, can I give someone a probationary contract?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so...
But for how long?
For 3 months.
So a probationary contract for 3 months?
Yeah.
But is that like a permanent contract and it's got a probationary clause in there? Or is it more like a temporary, like a fixed term contract kind of thing?
They will ask a probationary contract. So
Yeah.
I will struggle with the interpretation.
Look, I suppose to give somebody a probationary contract that is in context of an indefinite employment,
Yes.
and provided that the employer still accept their responsibilities as far as the probation process is concerned, that I suppose, that's neither here nor there. That should be fine. But the issue is, and in my experience, a lot of employers are actually giving fixed term contracts specifically for probation. Now that is a problem because first of all, our courts are finding that to be illegal. You can't put someone in a fixed term contract under the disguise of probation, because what in those circumstances happen then is employers are bypassing the LRA responsibility to a fair process. When you put someone in probation, you need to give the person a job description, KPIs,
There's targets.
There need to be targets or whatever the performance measurements are. And then there need to be a process where you review the performance of this person, let's say every month for 3 months. And thereafter you will be in a position as an employer to decide to extend it or put them in some kind of process, to maybe let them exit from the business or confirm their employment, their permanent employment. But the purpose of probation is not to deprive people of permanent status. But what employers are doing is, and they're doing this so that they don't have to do the hard work. They just want to employ you for 3 months, and then if they don't like you, they say you goodbye thereafter. So they don't want to follow the probationary process. And they're playing on this section 198B that deals with the regulation of fixed-term contracts, especially for those earning below the threshold. So your cheap employees, if you can put it that way, okay? That regulation only kicks in after 3 months. So they're operating in this grey space to say, listen, after 3 months, I must justify why am I giving you a fixed-term contract.
Yeah.
But before 3 months, I don't have to justify it. So they're playing in that space. But they're losing sight of section 186, okay, subsection 1, that deals with if a person's on a fixed-term contract and there's a reasonable expectation to renew and they don't do it, that actually amounts to an unfair dismissal. And there you can't say, but the reason why we didn't renew is because you were on probation. So you can't use probation as a reason for a fixed-term contract. But they lose sight of that provision.
So they're not aligning themselves with, they were only watching one-sided, ignoring the other one.
Yeah, look, for a lot of employers, employment is like a chess game. You see what you can get away with, There's that thing of, let somebody work overtime, you don't pay him. But once in 10 years, when somebody go complain, you just pay him.
When someone leaves your employment and resign, you don't pay their leave days.
Anyway, let's continue. Probation. So, requirements to serve probation. An employer may require a newly hired employee to serve a period of probation before the employee's appointment is confirmed. So there's the scope there, the context. You are now a permanent employee, as an example, okay? You put a person on probation before, and then he must successfully pass his probation before the permanent employment is confirmed. But a fixed-term contract, man, is something different, okay?
Yes.
The purpose of probation is to give the employer an opportunity to evaluate the employee's performance and suitability for employment before confirming the appointment, okay? Probation should not be used for purposes not contemplated by this code to deprive employees of the status of permanent employment. For example, a practice of dismissing employees at the end of their probation periods for reasons unrelated to their performance or suitability for employment and replacing them with newly hired employees is inconsistent with the purpose of probation and may constitute an unfair dismissal. Okay? The period of probation should be determined in advance and be of a reasonable duration. The length of the probationary period should be determined with reference to the nature of the job and the time it takes to determine the employee's suitability for continued employment. Reasonable guidance. During the probation, employer should give an employee reasonable guidance. See, this is where the work is coming in. You can't just employ somebody in probation and ignore him and then 3 months later, sorry, bye-bye, he's going to perform, okay? You need to give him guidance appropriate to the nature and size of the employer and the job, which may include instruction, training, or counseling, in order to allow the employee an opportunity to render a satisfactory service. So you need to engage from the employer side, okay? This is typically what we call the performance review process, you see. Then the decision not to confirm appointment. An employer may only decide to dismiss an employee or extend the probationary period after the employer has given the employee the opportunity to make representations and the employer has considered any representations made. Any person deciding about the fairness of a dismissal of an employee related to the employee's conduct or capacity, including poor work performance during or on expiry of the probation period, or to accept, taking into account the purpose of probation, reasons for dismissal that may be less compelling that would be the case in dismissals effected after the completion of the probationary period. So basically, if you are being dismissed during probation, the rules applied by a commission won't necessarily be so strictly applied in terms of substantive fairness. So the reasons can be less compelling than it normally would have been after probation. But you still need to have a process. You still need to have an opportunity for the employee to make representations. That's basically probation, and then incapacity, unsatisfactory performance after probation. So incapacity deals with your inability to adhere or to perform according to your contract of employment, and typically deals with two elements. The one is poor performance in general, and then also medical reasons. But dotted line, and what's quite nice about this code is it sort of now alludes to other forms of incapacity. That's not always related to medical reasons, like legal incapacity.
I was about to ask about that.
So now, in the old code, it didn't specify that. Now it actually referenced that there may be other forms, like for instance, illegal foreigners, or somebody getting banned from a casino, which is sort of out of control of a tenant, or an employer there. What do you do in those instances? Or in terms of the FACE Act, if you are a financial advisor and you are not qualified in terms of the FACE Act, then it becomes a matter of incapacity. So, unsatisfactory performance after probation. After probation, an employee should not be dismissed for unsatisfactory performance unless the employer has given the employee appropriate evaluation, instruction, training, guidance, or counseling. So it becomes a legal requirement now, in terms of it must be done, okay?
Yes.
Or so it seems. After a reasonable period of time for improvement, the employee continues to perform unsatisfactorily. Before dismissing, the employer should give the employee an opportunity to respond to the allegations of unsatisfactory performance. That is interesting. This is Schedule 8.19, subsection 2. There's always been a question as to whether you should put somebody in a hearing for poor performance. Now the code actually specifically states you must give somebody an opportunity to make representations. Okay, it doesn't specifically use the word discipline hearing, but I can only accept that it is a similar kind of process. So yes, there must be some kind of opportunity there. Guidelines in cases for dismissal for poor work performance. Any person determining whether a dismissal for poor work performance is unfair should consider the following: whether the employee failed to meet the performance standard, if the employee did not meet the required performance standard, whether 1. The employee was aware or could reasonably be expected to have been aware of the required performance standard. 2. The employee was given a fair opportunity to meet the required performance standard. 3. The required performance standard was reasonable or reasonably achievable. I'm going to get back to that one. And 4. Dismissal was an appropriate sanction for not meeting the required performance standard. I always had this thing in my mind, employees don't reach a target or they don't perform. Then I was always like, you get these employers, this year your target is 10 phones a day.
Yes.
Come end of the financial year, you have a nice staff party and braai, you thank everybody for the hard work, but next year the target is now 20. And the year after 30. I always ask myself, at what point does it become unreasonable? That is no longer achievable. That's why I normally ask, comparing to another person in a similar position, do they achieve it? But now it actually says a requirement here that the employer will have to demonstrate that the targets are actually, or the performance standard, they are actually reasonably achievable. That's becoming very important.
But now, wouldn't the other person argue in terms of, but this person has been in the business for 10 years and they got a proper clientele. In years they've built, they managed to reach a large scale clientele. I'm only here for 2 years. But now, when you do the comparison, you are comparing me with a person who's been here for 10 years. So,
but you see, that forms not part of this conversation. And I can't tell you really, because it depends on the merits and the circumstances of that specific case
100%.
and the circumstances there. But those kind of arguments will all form part of this now.
okay.
So if the employee is saying, look, it's not achievable, then they have to demonstrate and explain that. But interesting, they've inserted subsection 2 here, which is quite cool. Once again, it's nothing new if you read case law, but it's now in the code. Depending on the circumstances, an employer may not be required to warn an employee that if their performance does not improve, they might be dismissed. This may be the case for managers and senior employees whose knowledge and experience enables them to judge whether their performance is adequate, and employees with a high degree of professional skill where a departure from that high standard would have severe consequences justifying dismissal. So especially if you're a senior employee, you don't necessarily have to warn the person, listen, if you continue with your poor performance, it may lead to dismissal. You should have been able to make that judgment call yourself. Okay, that's interesting. It's in there. We always knew that, but now everybody knows what we used to know.
Yeah.
Okay, then incapacity, ill health, injury, and other forms of incapacity. Incapacity on the grounds of physical or mental ill health or injury may be temporary or permanent. Nothing new there. If an employee is temporarily unable to work in these circumstances, the employer should investigate the extent of the incapacity injury. Nothing new there. If the employee is likely to be absent for a time that is unreasonably long in the circumstances, the employer should investigate all the possible alternatives short of dismissal. When alternatives are considered, relevant factors include the nature of the job, the period of absence, the seriousness of the illness or injury, and the possibility of securing a temporary placement for the ill or injured employee. Nothing new there. In cases of permanent incapacity, the employer should ascertain the possibility of securing alternative employment or adapting the duties or work circumstances of the employee to accommodate the employee's disability. Nothing new. In the process of the investigation referred to in subsection 1, the employee should be allowed the opportunity to state a case in response and to be assisted by a trade union rep or a fellow employee. Nothing new there. Okay, the degree and cause of incapacity is relevant to the fairness of a dismissal on this ground. In the case of certain kinds of incapacity, for example, alcoholism or drug abuse, counseling and rehabilitation may be appropriate steps for an employer to consider. Particular consideration should be given to employees who are injured at work, nothing new there, or who are incapacitated by a work-related illness. In these circumstances, a duty on the employer to accommodate the incapacity of the employee is more onerous. Incapacity may be unrelated to ill health or injury. This is now the extra section that's been put in here. And may arise due to other factors preventing the employee from performing the applicable duties of the job, including imprisonment. So this is example they use.
Yes.
But foreigners who are here illegally also, okay? Such incapacity may be temporary or permanent. The employer should assess the extent of the incapacity and investigate all possible alternatives short of a dismissal. An employee's incompatibility as manifested by an inability to work in harmony with an employer's business culture or with fellow employees can constitute a form of incapacity may which justify a dismissal. So that part is also new. Now, we always knew that. It's always the incompatibility issue, but now it's actually been codified. So it is actually there. Nothing new really, but it wasn't expressly specified like that in the old code. Which is good. And lastly, operational requirements. a lot of this is still the same as how it's always been interpreted, but okay, so let's just touch base on this quickly. Where do we start? There you go. Okay, so this is Schedule 8, subsection 22, the nature of operational requirements. The Act defines a dismissal based on employer's operational requirements as one that is based on the economic, technological, and structural or similar needs of the employer. This type of dismissal is commonly called retrenchment. So retrenchment has never been used before. Word, yeah. Now it's actually in the code. We call this a retrenchment.
Yeah. Just like disciplinary hearing, which is called
an investigation. Now it's in there. It is difficult to define all the circumstances that might legitimately form the basis for retrenchment. As a general rule, economic reasons are those that are related to the financial state of the employer. Technological reasons refer to the introduction of new technology which affects work relationships either by making existing jobs redundant or by requiring employees to adapt to new technology, or a consequential restructuring of the workplace. Structural reasons relate to the redundancy of posts resulting from the restructuring of the employer's business. So there's nothing new there. This one is quite important. Nothing new, but it's important to know. Dismissals of operational requirements have been categorized as no-fault dismissals. Okay. In other words, it's not the employee who is responsible for the termination of the employment. Because the retrenchment is a no-fault dismissal, and because of its human cost, the Act places particular obligation on the employer, most of which are directed towards ensuring that all possible alternatives to dismissal are explored and that the employees to be dismissed are treated fairly. Nothing new there. Fair reason. To be fair, the reason for the retrenchment and the decision to select an employee for retrenchment must relate to the employer's operational requirements. Dismissal must be a measure of last resort. It should only take place if it cannot be avoided by alternatives. Employers must, of their own initiative, take appropriate steps to avoid retrenchment where reasonably possible. Nothing new, really. It's a fair procedure. When an employer contemplates the possibility of retrenchment, it must initiate a process of consultation by giving a written notice. The notice should be in the form of Annexure A, but that is typically your Section 189, Subsection 3, Invitation to Consult notice. HR practitioners are quite familiar with this document. The notice must contain the relevant information, okay? And then it goes through the consulting parties in terms of Section 189, Subsection 1. So basically, the employer needs to notify the consulting parties, whether that's a workplace forum or a trade union, or the employees directly, or if the employees nominate among themselves representatives for that purpose. Then in terms of consultation, the employer must then consult with a view to reaching consensus. Now, important here, the retrenchment consultation process is not a negotiation. We're not asking for permission. We're trying to consult in good faith. Okay? We're trying to reach consensus. But you don't need the comrade's approval, you see. Why are you laughing?
No, you remind me of 2 weeks back when I was in Durban. They're like, number 1, they must issue us a notice. Number 2, we must give them feedback, Number 3, they must tell us severance pay. Number 4, but we were doing end of contract at the time. We were not doing retrenchment. Yeah.
The employer must consult in good faith by keeping an open mind and seriously considering any proposals put forward by the union or employees. Now, in the old codes, the code didn't speak this kind of language, but now it's a bit more precise, you see. Okay, the consultation should cover the reasons why there is a need to retrench, the appropriate measures to, number 1, avoid retrenchments, minimize the number of retrenchments, change the timing of the retrenchments, mitigate the adverse effects of the retrenchments, and if employees are to be retrenched, the method for selecting the employees to be retrenched and the severance pay. Look, I'm not going to go through the rest. The rest just deals with the different elements of Section 189, which is the same as it's always been. You talk about the selection criteria with others who are affected. The disclosure of information. I do want to highlight on that one, disclosure of information.
Yes.
To ensure meaningful engagements, the employer must disclose relevant information. Section 189.4a of the Act, read to Section 16, regulates disputes about the disclosure of relevant information. So it says here, An employer must disclose relevant information.
Yeah.
So I suppose, you asked me earlier on, must a company disclose financial information?
Financial information.
I suppose if it's relevant, it must. So if you specifically say the reason for retrenchment relates to financial reasons.
And the comrades comes and say, but show us, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Okay. So what we normally do with the comrades, the unions, we will say to them, look, let's sign a NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. We will say on a specified day, the finance manager of the union and our finance manager will come together, and then they will
have
look
a
at the
demonstration
numbers and whatever the case may be. But you still need to disclose the information. So you don't necessarily have to give them a copy. It doesn't say you give somebody a copy of anything. It says disclose the information.
Yeah, there's a cement factory that I once...
what factory?
Cement. They're making cement.
I thought you said cement factory.
Cement!
Okay.
This guy. Yeah, but it's shut down now. It's closed down completely. Okay. And the comrades also wanted to murder me also.
It happens a lot these days. The other comrades in KZN also says if they see you again.
If I see you again, we're going to murder you. Yeah, that's what they said. So also, the comrades came through and say, you know what, you need to show us all those papers. But I think the employer was skeptical in disclosing that information, and then he was like, but I explained to you how it worked. We had like 5 orders for the day, but a year later we no longer own 5, we are on 3. What more do you need? The workforce knows, and the workforce understand that from last year we used to make 10,000 bags, but now we are dropped to 2,000 bags. So what more demonstration do you need in terms of me being transparent? Yeah. So production, but that's why I asked that question. Is it a must for the employer to disclose?
Must disclose, yeah.
Okay.
So, the period of consultation, it's never been as expressly stated like this, even though it's always been the law. The period taken for consultations and the number of consultation meetings is dependent on numerous factors, such as the complexity of the issues, giving rise to the retrenchments, the nature and size of the employer, and the scale of the retrenchments. Now, simple retrenchments, so there are in the LRA small-scale retrenchments, it's a normal Section 189, and the large-scale retrenchments, Section 189A. Small, simple retrenchments are at a small employer can be done relatively quickly. Yes. I normally do that between 7 and 10 days, within context of, depending on whether there's further consultations needed or whatever the issues may be. But as a skeleton, I say we put it down for 10 days and see where it takes us, Large and complex retrenchments will probably require more consultation meetings over a longer period of time. But if Section 189A of the Act is applicable, that's a large-scale one, the minimum period for consultations is 60 days. However, a consulting party may not unreasonably refuse to extend the period of consultation if such an extension is required to ensure meaningful consultation. That's basically the code, Tsepo. That's the new code. So we've got through all the various forms of dismissals. So again, they are simplifying the language. Also in a way, they contextualize it in a way that incorporates some of the key elements of the evolution through the courts in terms of how the courts interpret and apply dismissal law, and they're putting it in the code. So the only real big difference, what is really new, is the focus on small businesses. And just again, it doesn't say small businesses are those who employ an X amount of staff or below it. You have to justify on every single case, and typically it is linked to the amount of staff you have and whether you have capacity with HR staff, managers, and whatever. So there's no thumbsuck really. You have to figure it out for yourself as an employer. I mean, you can have a plumbing company with 5 staff, and another plumbing company with also 5 staff. It can be that the one's got an HR manager, an operation manager, and the other one don't. Then the one will probably have to follow the code. You see, so you have to motivate your position whenever there's a dispute at the CCM or Bargaining Council. That is really it.
That's really it. Do we have job reviews?
We will have job reviews, so let's see what vacancies are available. And Kanawa, I'll see you next time.
Thank you. See you next time. Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good morning, Harmony people. Let's have a look at some of the vacancies posted nationwide on our Harmony People's Network this week. Company Wellness Solutions has an opening for a front office administrator in 4 ways. They are also looking for a social media and digital strategy specialist and a chief financial officer to join their team. Lastly, Digital Surveying is seeking a field technician. For the full information of the mentioned positions, how to apply, as well as more available positions, find the vacancy link in the description. You will also find a link to a useful video on how to compose a winning CV and have a successful interview. Tune in again next week for more Harmony vacancies.